Eagles Entertainment.
With the 15th pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and today we are going to start our position preview series for the 2022 NFL Draft. We're a week away from previewing the Combine, but before we talk about that trip out to Indianapolis, I thought, let's get things started with our position previews, and we're going to do that with Draft Buzz. Right at the top of the show, myself, Dane, Brugler, Ben Fennell. We're going to talk through the tight end position and why not only is it one of the deeper positions in this draft, but also one of the more fun positions to discuss. And we're going to get into why right at the top of the show. After that, we've got On the Clock, where Ben, Dane, and I are going to pick 3 players for 3 teams at 3 different parts of the draft. It's a really fun exercise. This week, we are picking for the Los Angeles Chargers, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's going to be a fun discussion there in the On the Clock segment. Then we wrap things up with Mr. Relevant and Draft Buzz. For Mr. Relevant this week, we've got Kyle Krabs from the Draft Network. He's going to drop by, talk about some players from the Big Ten, this tight end position as well, and also some takeaways from his trips to Mobile for the Senior Bowl and to LA for the Super Bowl. So we'll talk all about that with Kyle Krabs. Wrap things up with our draft mailbag. As I talked about, we've got a mock draft from you, an Eagles only mock draft from a listener at home, and another good question as well we'll get to at the end of the show. As always, the best way to reach us, head on over to our Apple Podcast page, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you listen. Leave us a rating, leave us a comment. We can help you. You can help us. You help us boost the show up and all the different ratings metrics so that it's available for others that are looking for other NFL draft podcasts. And also, we can help you by answering your question or breaking down your mock draft, separating some player rankings at different positions. Whatever you've got for us, throw it on one of those pages. We will answer it here in an upcoming show. That said, let's get this one started. Excited to break down the tight ends with Dane Brugler and Ben Fennell in Draft Buzz.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
All right, well, like I said, excited to start our position preview series as I welcome in Dane Brugler and Ben Fennell. Guys, I wanted to start with tight end because I think it's a really interesting group. Like over the last 10 years, the average number of tight ends drafted every spring is just under 14. It's 13.8. The last 2 drafts, 2020, 2021, they were well below that mark. But back in 2015, we saw 19 get taken, 0 on day 1. And it really feels like this class is very similar to that one, where there's going to be a bunch of guys taken, probably none in the first round. But that class, you had like Max Williams and Tyler Croft and Blake Bell and CJ Uzomah and Nick Boyle, like guys who have turned into important quality role players, good backups. I feel like that's what this class is full of, which isn't a bad thing. Some people would say that's a knock. I don't think that that's a bad thing, but it's a really interesting group to kind of get through, and especially when you talk about all the different skill sets. And so what we're going to do in these position preview series, we're just going to have a handful of superlatives that we'll kind of throw out there, and we'll talk about options on day 1, day 2, and day 3. And each of us will kind of take different parts of the draft and just make sure we're just kind of combing through as many names as possible. Now, as I mentioned, this class doesn't really have a day 1 tight end. There's no Kyle Pitts in this class. So Dane and I are going to handle guys that we're likely to hear on day 2. Ben, you're going to take us home with a day 3 option here for a bunch of these categories. And we'll cover as many names as possible. And we'll start off with the best combo skill set. So a guy that can contribute both as an inline blocker and as a pass catcher. We know that teams really value that versatility. And Dane, I'll let you kick things off. I'm talking enough here about this group. I'll let you kick things off here. A day 2 combo tight end that really catches your eye.
For me, it's Jeremy Ruckert from Ohio State, who I don't think gets enough love out there in terms of being what he could be in the NFL. Easy to overlook him with how he was used at Ohio State. But when he was targeted, good things happened, and I think that's what you point to when you watch his tape. He logged a lot of snaps, but obviously they were not a ton of targets, and so I think he's not an elite blocker. I think people just assume because he was used as a blocker more so than a pass catcher that he's this amazing blocker. He's not. He's got his warts as a blocker. But I think he's good enough in that area, and I think he's good enough as a receiver that when I think of maybe the best combo skill set, Jeremy Ruckert is one of the first guys I think about in this class, and I think he's a day 2 player and someone who is going to come in and contribute pretty quickly.
That's kind of how I feel about Trey McBride from Colorado State, who a lot of people feel is the top tight end in this class. Came in a little bit smaller than people thought at the Senior Bowl, just over 6'3", so on the shorter side, still right around 250 pounds. McBride won the Mackey Award as the top tight end in college football, first-team All-American, two-time first-team All-Conference. So the accolades are certainly there. He had over 160 catches in his career, was the number one receiver essentially for that Colorado State offense over the last couple of seasons, which was mainly run heavy. It was a run-first offense there with the Rams. And with that in mind, he was used often at the point of attack. So this is a guy that's used as a blocker, catches everything. And that's the thing that stands out. He had a couple of really impressive grabs down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. But when you go through his target tape and you just watch all of his catches, this guy catches a lot of balls outside of his frame, all different awkward body angles. He rarely puts the ball on the ground. Just a really productive player. I just don't know that he's a dynamic kind of movable chess piece. I don't know that that's going to be Trey McBride's his game, but a really good combo skill set moving forward to the NFL. And I think you'll hear him go off the board sometime in day 2. Ben, take us home here with a day 3 option with that combo skill set.
Yeah, Trey McBride's a guy I've been categorizing as a tough guy with pillow hands. And that really kind of, covers his whole skill set. Doesn't separate well, but catches everything, adjusts well, and he'll get after it at the point of attack. He's a tough physical player. Day 3 option. Day 3 is 4 rounds, so it's a big spectrum. I'm going to give you an early day 3 and a late day 3 real quick. I love Cade Otton out of Washington. Don't forget about this guy. He unfortunately had the ankle injury late in the season, did accept a Senior Bowl invitation before that injury. Unfortunately, couldn't participate. We'll see if he's ready to go for the Combine or Pro Days. He's a guy that was the team's offensive MVP last year. He's an excellent blocker, easy hands, good yards after catch. He's a really, really interesting player, productive when healthy. Don't forget about Cade Otton, and a guy maybe in the 6th, 7th round. Don't forget about Charlie Kolar, who was kind of an unsung guy down at the Senior Bowl last week, didn't get a lot of attention. He has good size, good blocking tenacity, catches near everything as well. He's a guy I think has 5 drops on over 250 career targets. Another guy with a really good catch radius. Might be a red zone weapon type of guy. Not, the most dynamic yak guy or guy that's going to separate vertically. But Cade Otton out of Washington and then Charlie Kolar from Iowa State. 2 guys that I think have some pretty well-rounded combo skill sets.
Yeah, I know we're going to talk about Otton a little bit, Dane.
I was going to say, with Otton, I think the coaching staff's inability to get him more involved this past year is one of the main reasons they lost their jobs. He was the best player in that offense, and they couldn't give him the ball. They couldn't get him involved with the offensive game plan, and that's really was part of their downfall. I mean, there was other reasons too, but Cade Otton, I agree. Working on my top 100 that comes out this week. It pained me not. He was one of the first 5 guys that didn't make it, and I hated leaving him out because I think he's absolutely should be considered a top 100 player in this draft.
If you took Cade Otton and you put him into that Colorado State offense, I think the production looks almost identical to what McBride did. I think their skill sets are very, very similar. I will hit on that.
I just have no idea where his draft projection is with coming off the injury and all that. I kind of want to call him a 4th round, early day 3 player. There's a slight chance he could squeeze into in late day 2 there if maybe a team falls in love with him and all the injury stuff checks out.
All right, well, let's get into our next category here. The best move option, a guy that you're not necessarily going to put him in line all the time, but you put him in space as both a pass catcher and as a blocker, and kind of keep him out of traffic. And I'm going to cheat a little bit here, guys, because I'm going to go with Greg Dulcich from UCLA on day 2. I think when you look at Dulcich, the thing is that he played a lot in line. He's about a half an inch taller than Trey McBride. He's right around the same size. Both guys came in just a shade under 250 pounds. Dulcich has long arms. He is a former receiver. He came to UCLA as a wide receiver, and that speed shows up. This is a guy that can get down the field and be a factor at all 3 levels. And whether he's playing from the slot or in line, he threatens defenders really early in the route. And so to me, I look at Dulcich as a guy that has one of the higher upsides in this class, but he's no slouch as a blocker either. And that's the thing. I think when we talk about the move tight end, these guys, you still want to be able to use them as blockers. If you are a 0 in the run game, it's really hard to be able to get you on the field because you're a receiver at that point, and you're not valuing that versatility. That's not versatility. That's just, hey, he's more of a pass catcher than a run blocker. And I think Dulcich look, he's not a killer at the point of attack right now. He's definitely in that lose slow category in terms of what he can do in the run game. But when you talk about a guy that has the experience to put his hand in the dirt, you like him better in space. I love what he can do as a pass catcher. So Greg Dulcich, a guy, I think the arrow kind of pointing up here on the redshirt junior from UCLA, likely going to hear his name called on day 2. Dane, who's another guy in that area of the draft?
I'll go with Isaiah Likely, Coastal Carolina, who is more of an oversized wideout than prototypical tight end. He'll give effort as a blocker, but I think he's 241 pounds. I think that's what he was at the Senior Bowl. He doesn't have ideal length, doesn't have ideal bulk or build. The play strength is average in terms of controlling defenders at the point of attack. But as a receiver, he's fantastic. He had 1 drop this year on 77 targets. And he also had 14 receptions at 20 plus yards. So, I mean, he can, be a guy that stretches the field a little bit, had a 99-yard reception against Arkansas State earlier. So, yeah, as a blocker, you want to see him just be a little more physical. But the reason you draft him is because he's a playmaker as a pass catcher. He's a loose athlete, catches everything. The body coordination is outstanding to make adjustments on the football. He's your ideal F tight end at the next level.
Obviously the Rams winning the Super Bowl this weekend. 2 Rams connections with the 2 players we've already hit on. I actually compared Isaiah Likely to Gerald Everett, former second-round pick out of South Alabama. I think Likely and Gerald Everett have really similar skill sets. And then Greg Dulcich, the guy I covered a few minutes ago, really reminds me of Tyler Higbee, who is currently the Rams starting tight end. I think both of those guys have very similar skill sets. Ben, take us through your day 3 option as a move player at the position.
2 really quick ones, both in a 6'6" package, and I think they struggle to get their pads down and block. That's why they're more of the pass-catching weapons. Cole Turner out of Nevada, the converted receiver, skinny, 6'6", 245, above the rim guy, really productive down the red zone. And one that's kind of gotten a lot of buzz over the last few weeks, particularly off of his Shrine performance, Jelani Woods, who is every bit of 6'6", nearly 6'7", 260, with these just pillow soft hands, huge catch radius. Actually a pretty good route runner as well. He could be a mismatch guy. Only 1 year at Virginia since coming over from Oklahoma State, which we all know they do not feature the tight end in that Mike Gundy offense. So pretty quiet as far as production. Showed up to Virginia, showed up to the Shrine Bowl, and looked pretty dangerous there as a pass catcher. So I'm glad he got the combine invite.
All right, let's get to the next category here, and that's the best pure pass catcher. So we're going to take blocking completely out of the equation. Obviously, with some of these guys, we really liked the ability to impact the run game in space. But the best pure pass catching option, and I'll go day 2, Jalen Weidemeyer, a guy we haven't talked about yet. And this is the tight end from Texas A&M. True junior, was a big time recruit coming out of high school, started right away in the SEC for Jimbo Fisher. And so coming into the year, I think you saw Weidemeyer in a lot of mock drafts as a potential first-round pick. Didn't quite live up to that this year, and we can get into why. But the big thing really for me watching the film, he dropped a lot of passes. He just put a lot of balls on the ground. Otherwise, I think you're talking about him in that combo skill set type of player, because he's got the size to be able to be a factor at the point of attack. He's not a great blocker, but does just enough there. But I think when you look at his athleticism, his ability to get up to the second and third level, they use him a lot on those deep corner routes, some sail routes. They can use him at all 3 levels. And so I think if you're looking for a pass catcher at the position, Jalen Weidemeyer is a guy that I think is going to catch a lot of headlines and catch a lot of buzz. Dane, who's another guy that kind of fits that bill?
So just to kind of mix things up, I went with a day 3 player. It's someone that Ben mentioned earlier, and that's Charlie Kolar, because this guy just does not drop passes. And, I think if you're looking for a safe tight end who what you're going to get, Kolar's kind of that guy, because he's not a dynamic athlete. He's not going to separate a ton, but on contested catches, just throw it a little bit away from his frame, a little bit away from the defender that he can't get his hands on it, and Kolar's going to come down with it. He's going to find a way. So very strong to the football. Again, not going to threaten defenses vertically, not going to, his blocking, honestly, I was very disappointed. I think it leaves a lot to be desired. But he's going to be a dependable chain mover if that's what you're looking for in a tight end, because he's just a very reliable guy at the catch point.
Yeah, I agree. There's a bunch of those guys, as we've talked about already in this class. Ben, who do you like here, day 3 pass catcher?
And a day 3 guy reminds me a little bit of another Big Ten tight end that came out last year in Pat Freiermuth, probably more of a day 3 version. And that's Jake Ferguson out of Wisconsin, who I think has much more pass game receiving ability upside than being a true inline wide tight end. Put on any 3rd and 5+ of that Wisconsin offense, which I did over the weekend, they feature Jake Ferguson. The ball is going to him. He is the chain mover on third downs. He knows how to get open at the top of the route, really good speed cuts, snaps in and out of breaks, catches nearly everything. He is a really good pass catching weapon at 6'4", 245, and has played a lot of good football for Wisconsin. So don't forget about Jake Ferguson there in round 5, round 6.
I love it. Well, let's get to the other side of the coin here and the guys that were not factoring in the pass game production and what they did as receivers. Let's just focus in on those guys as blockers. And I'll start with a day 2 option. And Ben, it's a player you talked about earlier in that combo skill set. And that's Cade Otton from Washington. And we talk about what he could be in the pass game. But to me, you watch him in the run game, this is a tough, physical, competitive glass eater at the point of attack. He had some absolutely devastating blocks on film. Decleated some 4-eye techniques. You typically you see those guys in 285, 290 plus, working on double teams with the offensive tackle, just uprooted guys and got them on the ground. Really good on the backside of split zone. You get them up to the second level in the screen game or some end arounds, and he just dismantles linebackers and DBs at the point of attack. And like I said, that toughness, that competitiveness, that shows up all the time. Just a very willing, effective inline blocker. He'll also do plenty of work in pass protection as well. So that's why, to me, like Cade Otton, I'm probably more of one of the more underrated players, Dane, to your point earlier, in this class overall. But man, like you said, it's just tough to kind of gauge what that slot is going to be from a draft status standpoint. Dane, who's a guy you like here purely as a blocker on day 2?
Yeah, and again, I'm a cheat because I'm going to go with the day 3 player just to get another name in here, and that's John Fitzpatrick from Georgia, who junior came out early. And, if you don't know his name from that Georgia offense, then you're like a lot of people because he saw all of 15 targets all year. He was a blocker. That's how they used him. He's arguably the best run blocker in this draft class at the tight end position. Pass pro needs a little bit of work, but in terms of a run blocker, he moves guys at the point of attack. Really good drive strength, and he's got the attitude to go with it. So John Fitzpatrick, a surprise, didn't get invited to the combine.
Just say, yeah,
it could be one of those later round picks who draft strictly on his blocking ability.
And important to note, Fitzpatrick with a capital P in the middle, which you very rarely see. It kind of throws you off when you're writing up the notes on John Fitzpatrick. But a really good blocker, and I was surprised not heading to Indianapolis for the combine as a junior. You very rarely see that as an underclassman that does not get invited to the combine. Ben, who's the guy here on day 3?
I'll go with the guy that is going to the combine, but maybe one of the more unknown Power 5 players heading to Indy at any group, and that's Tegan Quitoriano from Oregon State. And I know you may think Pac-12, Oregon State. Oregon State's offensive line was a finalist for the Joe Moore Award. This is a team that gets after it in the run game. Is he featured in the pass game a lot? Not really, and he's okay with it. 6'5", nearly 260, showed up, got measured down at the Shrine Bowl. I thought he had a pretty good week down there, looked really competitive, nearly 600 special team snaps. This guy doesn't care if he sees a target. He just wants to blast backside defensive ends on split flow action, loves to run his feet up on linebackers and safeties. He's a guy that I think teams that get after it, running the ball, looking for that 12 personnel, second tight end that can block for you as well. Don't forget about Quitoriano there. I don't know how he's going to test. Probably not going to be the sexiest guy, in the 40 or, doing drills, but he's going to get after it. Kind of a glass eating type.
I love it. He's a guy I have not done yet, but I know you've spoken very highly of him at multiple occasions. So a guy I'm excited to do here moving forward. Let's get to a couple of final ones here. First off, player comp. And we're not going to use any kind of round or part of the draft stipulations here. I'll lead things off with Garrett Prince from UAB, kind of a one-year wonder guy. Only had 14 catches coming into the season, had 36 this year, scored 10 touchdowns, second team all-conference. This guy, number 1 at 6'4", 239, really athletic, really fluid, really smooth. He gets the top speed quickly. There's just not a lot of wasted movement with him at all. A consistent factor on special teams, and I think that's going to be a key for him moving into the league, that ability to stick early. He went to the Shrine Bowl, was impressive down there by all accounts, but this guy's played nearly 300 core special team snaps, has been really impactful as a 3-level threat as a receiver. And I think, look, you're not looking at him as a quote unquote starting tight end, but I think as a quality kind of change of pace player. I wrote down Josiah DeGuara, who was a 3rd-round pick by the Green Bay Packers a couple years ago. If you want to go with like a Trey Burton, who was an undrafted free agent a couple years ago out of Florida by the Philadelphia Eagles. The name I settled in on, and Ben, I know you'll like this, James Casey, who spent some time here in Philadelphia, but also was really good with the Houston Texans. I feel like James Casey is a really good comp there for Garrett Prince and his ability to kind of impact the game multiple ways, and not a bad blocker either. He's a guy, you get him out in space, he can do some work on linebackers and safeties. So Garrett Prince from UAB, a guy to keep an eye on here as a non-combine invite to watch. Ben, who's a player comp for you?
I like Prince. He just needs to change that number 20. I just can't let my eyes adjust to it watching a tight end wearing 20, but that's more of a me problem than a him problem out there. I'm going to go with a Trey McBride comp, which I know a lot of people are trying to figure that out. And he reminds me a lot of an Owen Daniels. And I don't think he's going to be a great tester. He might be a 4.7, 4.75 guy, but that's not how he wins. He's not going to run past people vertically. He's going to win with nuance at the top of the route, catching everything, and being a two-way player. He's a 3-down, never come off the field type of tight end. That was Owen Daniels. For who? Kyle Shanahan and those run-first types of offensive coordinators that he's played for, like he did for the Houston Texans. I think Owen Daniels, Trey McBride is a really interesting comp of style and skill set.
All right, so we've got Owen Daniels, we've got James Casey. Dane, if you don't come up with like a Benny Joe Prue or like a Billy Miller comp here, I don't know what we're going to do. Well, we need a Texas tie-in for every comp is.
First of all, I'm glad you brought up Garrett Prince because I have him ranked a lot higher than several of these tight ends that got combine invites. So Garrett Prince he's a top 15 tight end in this draft. 2, I also have a Trey McBride comp, and I'm going with Hayden Hurst, a guy that I don't think Hayden Hurst necessarily plays dynamic, but he's competitive as a receiver, he's competitive as a blocker. He plays with urgency, works in the middle of the field. And I think McBride's kind of a very similar in a lot of those ways, where I don't know that he's ever going to be a guy that's a number 1 or number 2 in an offense, but he might be a reliable 3 or a 4, just in terms of the way he can impact the game. So to me, when I look at Trey McBride, I see some similarities to Hurst.
And Hayden Hurst, not a former Houston Texan, but we'll let you go on that one. Let's get to the next category here. And a guy that we're just surprised isn't getting a little bit more love. It's a really deep tight end class, so understandable that this would happen. I'm going to go James Mitchell from Virginia Tech. And Ben, I know he first kind of popped on our radar. I think it was Mel Kiper had him as like a top 5 tight end. It was was it last year or the year before? I was like,
last fall.
Sure, yeah, we got to make sure we note James Mitchell, 6'3", 242 pounds. Was a part-time quarterback in high school, made that move to tight end late in his high school career. I was first put on to him, though, back in February 2020. Dalton Keene kind of gave me, hey, this is going to be a guy to watch here moving forward. Just really awesome athletic player, high upside. Guy's very, very impressive film. And this is a guy that can impact all 3 levels. He tore his ACL in week 1 this season, so did not play. I think it's kind of an out of sight, out of mind thing, but this is a guy that can win at the point of attack. He's more of a loose, slow type of player in the run game, as we talked about a few of those guys. But this guy, he contributes on special teams. Another player with nearly 300 core special team snaps. I wrote down Charles Clay. While watching, I think he can kind of have that impact, but this is a guy I don't think you're worried about getting him in line and doing too much with him there as well. I think that this is a guy who plays a little bit bigger than his size. He's not going to be a killer in the run game, but what he does as a matchup player in the pass game, I think will bring a lot of value to an NFL offense.
Yeah, he's a really interesting player. I loved his tape. I thought he really got after in the run game, was a little undersized and kind of had that almost like a Delaney Walker profile.
Yeah, sure.
Another guy I think is kind of interesting in a similar type of mold, which I didn't plan this, Fran, is Chigo Okonkwo out of Maryland, who's kind of an H-back, fullback, move tight end type that's all sorts of rocked up and loves getting after it, blocking as well. So he's a guy heading to Indianapolis. I think he had a good week down at the Shrine practices, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. And one guy not going to Indy, I'm just going to throw out here, that's a lot of fun, and I bet he makes a roster next year. Ko Kieft out of Minnesota, number 42. He's got long hair coming out the back. He's 6'5", nearly 270, blocking, tight end, fullback, H-back, whatever you need him to do out there. He's a really fun player. Look for number 42 out there at Minnesota. I really want Brevin Spain Ford to come out this class. who's another good blocking tight end at Minnesota, but I think he went back.
I'm gonna need some clarity on O'Keefe.
O'Keefe, that's Kieft. All right, don't quote me on the pronunciation. I think it's Kieft or Keft but he seems like he's like a rock star icon out there. He's got the flowing hair out the back. He's just glass eating and blocking people off the field. He's fun to watch.
I like it. All right, well, Dane, who's your guy that you're surprised isn't getting a little bit more love?
I'm going to go with Austin Allen from Nebraska, who was the Big Ten tight end of the year. He rewrote the tight end record books at Nebraska, had 5 plays of 30-plus yards this year. And he's just a really, really tall receiver who can pull down throws. He gives a quarterback a big target. Had only 1 drop this year. So he's a guy that when he's targeted, he can, he move the chains. He can help you in the red zone. So I think with Austin Allen, he's not a top 100 pick by any means, but someone that I'm surprised isn't getting a little bit more love as a draftable player.
No, he's a guy that's got that invite to the combine. Like you said, he set all kinds of records at Nebraska. Last category here, guys. Day 3 or just kind of late round, potential UDFA sleepers to keep an eye on here. I want to talk about a guy that got that late call up to the Senior Bowl, arrived midweek in Mobile, Alabama. That's Trey Barry from Boston College. 6'6", 240-ish pounds, but he's got an incredible wingspan. He's really, really long. Transferred from Jacksonville State, and he was outstanding at the FCS level. Was an All-American in the short 2020 season, but you go back over the course of his career, consistently productive, created big play after big play after big play down there at Jacksonville State. He came into school as a high school quarterback, wide receiver, tight end, combo athlete type, right? So when you look at Trey Barry at 6'6", with that length, you're like, oh, this guy's not really athletic. No, this guy is a long strider. You get him on the move on some of these just linear routes. You keep him on like those deep overs, the fades, those where you don't have to like break down at the top of the route. He can run away from people. He's kind of impressive when you watch him, and he's fun on film. He rarely puts the ball on the ground. So you could talk about him as one of those pillow hands players that Ben mentioned earlier. He's an interesting player. You want to be able to continue to add some more weight, get him a little bit bigger and stronger. Obviously spent most of his career at the FCS level in an FCS weight program. So we'll see if he can beef up a little bit bigger. But Trey Barry, I got to keep an eye on here. We got to see flashes of him at the Senior Bowl. Ben, who's a guy that just kind of catches your eye that we're talking about later in the draft?
Well, a guy heading to the combine I didn't know a whole lot about. That's Curtis Hodges. At his Arizona State, converted receiver. He's got really good length, really good size, and he gets after it blocking as well. He's got some eye-popping pancake blocks down the seam on safeties and linebackers as well. So he's a guy I didn't know a whole lot about. Still diving into his tape. We'll see what I can uncover, but definitely in the sleeper category right now.
He started as a blocking wide receiver when he was at Arizona State, and they were like, screw this. Let's just make the guy a tight end. And I know he was named the most improved player on the team this season.
And you got to love that with a staff full of NFL background guys and some personnel. So you definitely love to see the improvement throughout his college career.
No doubt. Dane, who's the last player here we're going to cover?
So I'm going to go with another guy who was invited to the combine. That's Chase Allen from Iowa State. And, we mentioned Charlie Kolar earlier, a guy that deserves to be mentioned, but so does his teammate Allen. And I'm not sure some of these tapes when you're watching a Kolar, Allen's making just as much, if not more of an impact with the way he can block, with the way he can get open down the seam. He's a light athlete, tall, light athlete for the position. Really quick hands so he can snare outside of his frame. Not going to create a ton of movement in the run game, but man, is he tenacious. So I think Chase Allen is a guy that's not getting nearly enough love and could be a surprise if he's not a late draft pick, then a PFA who has a shot to make a roster.
Real quick, some guys that we didn't hit on. Grant Calcaterra, SMU, Oklahoma transfer, went to the Senior Bowl. Concussions were an issue for him in Oklahoma. He actually retired briefly, stepped away from the game, came back here in 2021. Daniel Bellinger from San Diego State was also down at the Senior Bowl. He actually won the tight end award of the week for the American squad, 6'4", 250 pounds, one of those combo skill set guys. And then the 2 fullback tight end, H-back types, Connor Hayward from Michigan State, Jeremiah Hall from Oklahoma, both guys down at the Senior Bowl. We didn't hit on those guys. Wanted to make sure I dropped their names into the discussion. Guys, before we get to On the Clock, just a quick film and recap. I want to touch base with you guys and see if there's a player that you've watched over the last week you want to talk about. Dane, I'll come to you first here. Who's a guy that you've studied over the last week you want to make sure we bring to the limelight here?
Well, I wanted to talk about Alex Wright, who, we've talked about before, and I'm really eager to get his measurements at the combine because he's really tall and he's filled out his frame. How long is he? Because he plays with tremendous length on film. A really rangy athlete. He can convert that speed to power. He doesn't have an explosive first step, but his second and third steps are really impressive. He can work the edge. He's got an inside move that works. You've seen him kind of evolve with his hand use, cross chop, and different two-hand swipes and rips and different things like that. So Alex Wright's really, really interesting. He's growing and getting, both mentally and physically, and just getting better and better as we go on. And, it's fun to kind of think about where his ceiling could be. Definitely still a work in progress, but you talk about betting on a guy with length, with some movement skills. He could be disruptive versus pass, versus the run. The game seems to slow down for him the more he plays. So he's a really, really interesting player because of just that reactive athleticism and that length. And because of those traits, I think you're going to bet on him at some point in day two. Figuring out where he belongs on day two, I think that's an interesting discussion and debate, but I think he definitely belongs somewhere in that second, third round area.
The three of us have talked about him offline, and Ben, you and I both wrote the same name down while watching him, and that's Marcus Davenport with the New Orleans Saints, who they traded up for, famously gave up a future first round. They spent 2 first-round picks on Marcus Davenport coming out of UTSA, and I think when you're looking at a pure height, weight, speed profile, I think Wright, and Dane, as you mentioned, we'll see what the official measurements are with Wright once he goes to Indianapolis, but just a really unique blend of size and movement skills. Ben, who's your film and recap here for the week?
Well, I want to take a look at Sky Moore out of Western Michigan, who I was surprised got the combine invite, and I hadn't done a whole lot of work on. And I was pleasantly surprised and impressed with his tape. A very productive receiver at Western Michigan, unfortunately wearing that ugly number 24 out there. I think it's because he was a converted corner from the Pittsburgh area. Might have had some Darrelle Revis hopes in his sights there, but he converted to the offensive side. Really, really interesting athlete because he has explosive speed, but knows how to use it, can manipulate strides and pacings, and knows when to use bursts and knows when to cook that long speed. He's a guy that never looks like he's fast on the field and just ends up separating from everybody, whether in the short area windows or vertically down the field. Really good hands, good tracking, bit of a body catcher at times, but he doesn't drop the ball. So I don't care how you have to catch. You want to catch the ball in your teeth. If you don't have drops, I'm cool with it. So it's not a problem until it's a problem. He's a little light. He's about 5'10", 190. Reminds me a little bit of the Khalil Shakur type of player in this draft, except this guy's reportedly, he's flirting with sub 4'3". So this is a guy that may turn some heads at the combine out there. And if you haven't gotten that Western Michigan tape yet, he's a guy that's a little bit slow as far as the buzz and the national exposure. But Sky Moore with 2 Y's, SKYY Moore, pay attention to him. He'll be in Indianapolis, and he could be one of the darlings of the week.
Go ahead.
So I'd say with Sky Moore, he's definitely a guy that has created a little bit of buzz here since he declared. I mean, I think that he's got a real shot to go on day two. A lot of it's going to depend on how he works out, because I think, Ben, you're right. He doesn't look like he's a blazer necessarily. And you don't see a ton of explosive yak on his film, but at the same time, he's still creating pockets of separation. He's still making these tough catches. I think Sky Moore is a top 100 pick in this draft.
Just off the cuff, Fran, I know you watched him as well. I don't know if it's just the jersey or 24. He has that kind of block frame where he doesn't look very angular, where it almost looks like a running back out there kind of playing the receiver position. It's purely an aesthetic visual. I know his shoulders are wider than his waist, but it just looks like he doesn't have that angular track type of profile, but he just ends up running past everybody out there. So it's very smooth speed.
No, I texted you as I was watching him because I know you asked me if had you done him yet, and I was like, I'm actually planning on doing him tomorrow morning. And I was like 30, 40 plays in. I was like, he kind of reminds me of Roy Halou when he was in Washington. Roy Halou, they flexed him out wide all the time, and I think it's just like the body type and like the number. I'm like, yeah, like he kind of reminds me of Halou. But being more serious, the more I watched, I ended up writing down Andre Roberts, who had like a 10-year career in the NFL and kind of like a do everything player. He could do a little bit of everything. I don't know if he had like a 1A trait. And I think Andre Roberts kind of fit that for me for Sky Moore. Not a guy that I don't know. You're saying like, oh yeah, I really feel good about this guy being a starting, number 1, number 2 type receiver, but you want him on your football team. And that's
I saw some flashes of Santonio Holmes.
Interesting.
I thought that highly of his route running and his speed. I don't think he obviously has that level of status with his prospect right now, but we'll see.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, for me, I'll stay at the wide receiver position. Wan'Dale Robinson from Kentucky was a guy I was really interested to watch coming in because obviously you saw the highlights, right? And watching Kentucky this year, this guy was just electric. I would compare it to where I was at this point with Elijah Moore, who ended up being a top 50 pick with the New York Jets last year. And I was just interested to kind of come in on Wan'Dale Robinson was, all right, like 5'10", 185. Is this guy just like a gadget guy and like a fun player in college? Or can this guy be an NFL receiver? I'll tell you what, like this guy knows how to use he's dynamic as an athlete. He's explosive, but he knows how to use that speed. He can separate at the top of routes. He doesn't really put the ball on the ground all that often. It's not just like the short gadget stuff because he'll track the ball over the shoulder, surprisingly effective in those contested situations, just really soft, natural hands. I thought he had really good flashes at all 3 levels as a route runner. So I'm going to do more on Robinson, but this guy is not just, he's just a kind of a gadget player. You get him on reverses and screen game, get him the ball. Like, no, this guy can play receiver. And I was even going back through my notes. I know Bruce Feldman wrote about him during the transfer period. It was this offseason and said like the coaches were wowed by him at Kentucky with, just his work ethic. And they called him a football junkie. And you look to me, like watching on film and seeing like, okay, like this guy's more than just his speed and more than just his athleticism. And then you read that and you're like, all right, well, that kind of matches up. Right. So I'm excited to do more. Maybe we're talking about maybe this guy's a little bit undervalued right now in this receiver class. And again, just a really deep group that we'll be breaking down here in an upcoming episode. But that said, before we wrap this up, we're going to get into our next segment. It's time now to go on the clock.
On the clock.
All right, guys, let's get into our on the clock where once again, we are going to each get a random team, a random position, a random part of the draft. And we can give the player, but I also want to get the why. So obviously all 3 of us have been assigned players. You got that assignment earlier this week, but I want you to kind of give us a little bit of a peek inside your thought process into the whys behind it. And so Dane, we'll start with you. You have the highest draft choice this week per the randomizer. You had round 2 with the LA Chargers. You're going defense with the cornerback position. What do you like here for the Chargers at the corner spot?
Well, this is kind of hard to believe, but this is Tom Telesco's 10th draft as a GM already. And we've had a wide-ranging sample size of kind of what he looks for on draft weekend and what the results have been. I think there's been an interesting trend the last few years. In 2019, 3 of the Chargers' first 5 picks were non-FBS players. They were comfortable with those small school guys. But then the last 2 drafts, they have gone strictly Power 5. All 15 draft picks have been players from Power 5, not even Group of 5. So we're talking big name schools, and I think that's certainly noteworthy. And as we look at the cornerback position, probably lose Chris Harris to free agency. So, the Chargers, they scored last year with Asante Samuel falling to them in the 2nd round. They rotated him in the nickel some. He can play inside, outside interchangeably. So I think that gives the Chargers a little bit of flexibility here, with which type of cornerback you're going to draft. And that said, I think if Kyle Elam is still there at pick 48, to me, that makes a ton of sense. You put Samuel in the nickel. You keep Elam outside. He's got size. He's got skill. He can press. He can play zone. I think there's some Carlton Davis to his game. And I think that'd be 2 straight years where they kind of get lucky with a talented junior corner falling to them in the 2nd round.
Coming from the state of Florida as well. Elam, an interesting player. And I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the profile of guys. And also looking back at Tom Telesco as well, they have not been afraid of guys that don't test great. And I think that Elam is not going to be a guy I think is going to torch us in terms of what he runs in the 40 and what he looks like in the shuttles and things like that. So and also they tended to strand more towards some underclassmen as well. So I think Elam definitely fits the bill there. Ben, let's come. Actually, no, I'll go next because I actually have a round 3 guy. I have the San Francisco 49ers at the wide receiver position. Again, all this selected by a randomizer that we've go to one of those websites and spin the wheel at each spot. But to me, looking over John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, big school operation, unless he is a great athlete or very productive. Obviously, Trey Lance, they kind of went off the board a little bit there, and that was one of the big knocks. We talked about that when the 49ers made the trade, was they typically have gone big school. But I think when you look at overall the way that they've operated, it's been a lot of bigger schools, Power 5 competition. Toughness is a staple of what they look for, whether that's Shanahan or whether that's John Lynch, whatever that is. Also senior heavy. Only 3 players of the 17 that they have taken on day 1 or day 2 were true underclassmen. So definitely trending a little bit older in terms of the players that they select. So ultimately, it came down to 3 players for me. One of them was a junior, and that's John Mechie from Alabama, who's coming off an injury. I went away from John Mechie. And so then it came down to Calvin Austin and Christian Watson. Calvin Austin, 2 very different body types, by the way. Calvin Austin, undersized, more of a slot receiver from Memphis. I would love the idea of Calvin Austin in that Kyle Shanahan offense, but I also then look at the way that they like to play offense, and obviously it's going to focus around the run game, and you want all these guys to be able to participate as blockers. And that's why I end up going with Christian Watson, the wide receiver from North Dakota State here. So they're going outside of their normal big school operation, but again, it's unless the guy is special from an athletic standpoint or from a production standpoint. Christian Watson was very, very productive and started being productive at a very young age, where he was catching passes from who? Trey Lance, right? And I kind of wonder if the Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow effect will take place here with some of these young quarterbacks in this draft as teams try and pair some of their former pass catchers with these guys. And that's certainly a possibility here with Christian Watson, San Francisco 49ers, round 3. Ben, Dane, I'm interested to kind of get your guys' feedback on that fit and on that selection.
I really like that. I think that's exactly the profile of receiver they need to kind of complement and balance the receiver room. Well, like you had mentioned with Ayuk and Deebo Samuel's obviously versatility. I think Christian Watson is a perfect fit there, especially his kind of comfortableness in the run game as well, and lining up all over the formation, pinning it down defensive ends, digging out safeties, and then being kind of a fixture in the pass game off a run action. I think that's a perfect situation for Christian Watson.
Yeah. I think John Mechie, to me, if Mechie makes it to the 3rd round, it's just something must be going on with the knee. But no, I do agree. I like the fit quite a bit, especially pairing him with Lance again. I think that there's familiarity there. There's something to that connection that I think makes a ton of sense. And Watson he's still raw. I don't think it's talked about enough how raw he is as a route runner, but he's really tough. And I think that's something that Kyle Shanahan really covets in his receivers. I mean, that's why Dante Pettis didn't make it. I mean, he was too soft. And I think Christian Watson brings a level of toughness that they're looking for.
He's a guy also 50 career rushing attempts. So move over Deebo Samuel. It might be another wildcat kind of running back there.
As I was digging into the profile, I was like, this one makes a lot of sense. So I felt good about that one in round 3. Ben, this week you were assigned the Jacksonville Jaguars with a new head coach, former Eagles head coach.
Jacksonville Jaguars, okay.
So you got the Jacksonville Jaguars interior offensive line.
Interior,
late day 3 of the draft. So late in the draft, interior O-line with the Jacksonville Jaguars.
All right, Jaguars interior O-line, center guard, late day 3. So we're talking round 6, round 7. We need like a little spinning wheel graphic here so I could think while we set this up. So did a little bit of research here. Interesting. Okay, so coincidentally, the Jags don't have a very deep history of taking interior offensive linemen on day 3. So first thing I'm pulling up here is I want to see what type of players they've taken. The last 14 draft guys, 14 drafts, 2 interior offensive linemen on day 3, Ben Barch and Luke Bowanko. Kind of interesting that they've only taken 2 on day 3 in the last nearly 15 years over different regimes. But new head coach and Doug Peterson, Trent Baalke's still out there. Probably need to replace Andrew Norwell. AJ Cann wasn't healthy last year. Brandon Linder and Barch are still under contract. So what does Peterson want to do here, Fran? A lot of run game, obviously. I think we're going to try to hand the ball off and give Trevor Lawrence some balance, but it's power and zone. A lot of screen game. Peterson loves a screen game. Yep. Obviously an extension of Andy Reid. So we're going to need some versatility, some athleticism. Some guys I'm thinking about for late day 3 here, Justin Schaefer, maybe out of Georgia, Cade Mays. maybe an early day threer, but I think all intents, he's probably going to be a late guy with good versatility, started up and down the line. Lacita Smith, I think I compared to AJ Can. So I think he's the guy in the conversation, but you know what? In the 6th, 7th round here, I think he's going to be staring us right in the face, and I'm going to run to the podium with Luke Fortner out of Kentucky, who I think's played a lot of good ball out there in the SEC for Mark Stoops. Guy has played some center, some guard. They love the screen game as well in that offense. Versatile player. He can excel moving people off the ball or his quickness. He's kind of a sneaky interior offensive line option. I don't think he's getting enough love. So I think Luke Fortner in there. I thought about Dawson Deaton, another guy with some experience up and down the line there. But Luke Fortner, Fran, what do you think about that fit for Doug Peterson's offense?
I think especially with the versatility. And, Doug Peterson saw the value of that versatility along the offensive line during his time here in Philadelphia. So I think the versatility aspect of playing the line position, I mean, we talk about it ad nauseum here on the show. So our listeners should not be surprised by that. But I think that Fortner makes a ton of sense.
Kind of a ho-hum technician. Reminds me a little bit of like an Isaac Seumalo almost, who was a day 3 pick, and we're laughing about that now as Isaac's been a core member of this offensive line for the last 6, 7, 8 seasons.
And one of the more underrated players from the Senior Bowl too. I thought he had a rock solid week from start to finish down there. So guys,
really smart guy too. He's going to pick up his 2nd master's degree in May, so not too shabby.
Pretty good. It's 2 more than this triumvirate of podcasts. Guys, this has been great as always. We'll be back with both of you next week, where we are going to start our preview for the scouting combine in Indianapolis, which is the week after that, believe it or not. So, guys, good stuff. We will talk to you next week.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
All right, excited to welcome back here for the first time in a long time, Kyle Krabs from the Draft Network. You can follow him on Twitter at Grinding the Tape. Kyle, welcome back to the show, man.
Friends, good to be back talking a little shop. Always excited to talk ball with you. Got a chance to see a little bit down in Mobile and catch up a bit, so I'm glad we could parlay that into me talking your ear off for a couple of minutes.
That's right. No, I'm excited to have you back on. It was good to be able to catch up with you in person for the first time in a while down in Mobile. That said, we have talked a lot about the tight end position here on this show. And so I wanted to kind of continue that discussion. And it's such a crowded group, as we've talked about. We've hit a ton of names earlier with Dane and with Ben. So I just want to ask you right off the top, as we sit here today, mid-February, it's the day after the Super Bowl. I want to ask you, who are your top 3 tight ends and how do they kind of separate from each other at this point in the process?
Yeah, it's really tough. And I know, you could probably ask 10 people and get 5 different answers for who tight end 1 is out of this group. I like Jalen Weidemeyer from Texas A&M, big-bodied receiving type guy. I think he's a guy I would probably feel the most comfortable growing into in an all-around type of role. Sure. Cade Otton from Washington, another 6'5" guy. He's effective as a receiver. I think he gives you a little extra than Weidemeyer does with the ball in his hands, but he's bigger and physical than some of the other guys that I mentioned. And Isaiah Likely from Coastal Carolina, who's kind of that mismatch detached big slot type receiver. And that's no shade cast to the likes of Trey McBride and Jeremy Ruckert and Jake Ferguson. Like, there's a lot of good tight ends in this group. But if I were to look at my top 3, those would be the names that I look to. And I get the most excited about them in an optimized role for their respective skill sets in the NFL.
That's what I was just going to hit you on. It's funny that all 3 of those guys kind of represent different skill sets, right? Yeah. Otten, more that inline player underneath, who catches everything, Likely more often than not detached from formation, use him on the move, try and keep him in space, and Weidemeyer kind of the blend of the 2 skill sets. So it's interesting that your top 3 guys kind of cover check all 3 of those different boxes.
Yeah, and I mean, you look beyond those guys too, and I think McBride is somebody who's capable of doing everything, but I think his receiving skills pop the most, and Jeremy Ruckert was not used in a receiving aspect, but his receiving upside is quite apparent, and Jake Ferguson is another guy who's kind of in the middle between the 2 roles too, so that you can almost kind of build out a 2 deep on, do you want a traditional Y? Do you want an F? Do you want a hybrid? I do not envy teams for having to sort out how to draft these guys, because the plethora of talent here is really strong this year. I like the top of the group a lot.
All right, well, let's get into some of the players from your area, and you cover Big Ten country for the Draft Network, obviously with an eye towards the top prospects in the nation as well. But one player from the Big Ten that has started to catch a little bit more buzz, especially after what he did during the week in Senior Bowl, especially on Thursday's practice, and then in the game with some pressures on the quarterback, and that's Minnesota pass rusher Boye Mafe. So I want to ask you, number one, when did he first kind of catch your eye? And then how do you see him transitioning to the NFL? Where does he stack up in what is just a ridiculous group of edge pass rushers?
Yeah, so Mafe got some praise from Coach Fleck in the summertime. And, that's when we first do our initial wave through our regions. And we go back through them again. And we've just started our cross-check process. So we're kind of looking nationally across everybody for all our scouts. But watched him in the summertime, and it was like, oh, man, like he's got all the tools you could possibly dream of for a rusher with his length and his explosiveness. And I thought Minnesota, he was one of those guys who I thought was a little bit of a victim of being such a good athlete that they wanted to use him in more ways than probably would have made sense if you were just utilizing him in a way to develop him for the next level. But you got a chance to see in Mobile, when you put him in the one-on-one situations, the length and burst that he has for a guy in the 260 range is pretty solid. And I think he's going to be one of those players who is a better pro than he is a college player. The comp that I have for him is Josh Uche, who I believe was a second-round pick for the New England Patriots in 2020. And he was a guy who, that Michigan defense, under Coach Don Brown, they moved guys around and kind of had the hybrid linebacker who could play off the ball, play on the ball. And you saw a little bit of that with Mafe, but I like him as either a Sam linebacker or a 3-4 rush linebacker as the two roles that I'm most excited to see him potentially land in, depending on who calls his name.
Yeah, we saw Daniel Jeremiah call him a first-round talent after that Senior Bowl game. And as you know, the buzz is only going to build as we make that trip out to Indianapolis, because Mafe is a ridiculous athlete that shows up on the tape. And based on when you talk to people around him, the way he's going to test is going to be really, really impressive as well. So my guess is we're going to continue hearing the buzz build around Boye Mafe. And another guy who the buzz is continuing to build upon, really based off what he did this year as a senior, that's Arnold Ebiketie from Penn State, the Temple transfer. I'm interested to kind of get your thoughts on him and how you see him kind of stacking up in this edge class. Do you feel like he's in that first round discussion because he's in a lot of mock drafts? Other people kind of see him sliding into day two. How do you feel he stacks up against some of the other top players at the position?
Yeah, so I actually have him and Mafe graded similar as far as their valuations, but they are different players. Ebiketie coming from Temple. The comp that I have for him is Josh Sweat, who just signed a nice contract extension with the Philadelphia Eagles and has experience in kind of that wide 9 type system. And Penn State has had a lot of ends over the last couple of years who have fulfilled that same kind of role with that real aggressive upfield penetration and first step. And I do think that's where Ebiketie has the best opportunity to make an impact. I value him personally as a day 2 guy. I look at some of the top edge rusher types, and you're running 6 deep for guys that I think are slam dunks for the edge group. So I think it's more of maybe a numbers game than it is necessarily any kind of shade at Ebiketie or Mafe, who I think have an outside chance, but I probably would be evaluating other positions there unless I was absolutely drafting for need. I'm interested to see how he continues to develop. I thought he did a really nice job this year in Penn State versus when he was at Temple, as far as playing the point of attack and holding his ground. Obviously with his first step, there's a lot of people who tend to fall in love for the twitchy first step and bend off the outside edge. And he's shown some nuance in his pass rush counter. So he's not just a speed guy, but he is somebody who I think might benefit from having a little bit of an incubation period when he first gets into the league to be an every down type of player who's going to be able to play the run anywhere near as reasonably as I think his ceiling is as a pass rusher. I just don't think those two dynamics of his game personally are close yet, and that might impact playing time for him as a rookie.
Yeah, I think that's all fair. And I think the fact that, you as you mentioned, ahead in one area of his game, but I think the fact that he still presents some value on both sides is going to help him. He's not just a pure pass rusher. He can give you a little bit of value on both ends of it. And the arrow's pointing up. I mean, the funny thing about him is he was a part-time player for the most part at Temple. And then he goes to Penn State and becomes an every down player, and that played more snaps. I believe played more snaps last year than he had in the previous two combined at Temple. So, just a guy that took on that full-time role at a higher level of competition and was able to come through and be really, really productive on a good senior-laden Penn State defense. I think that speaks well about Ebiketie. I know you just got back off the road from the Super Bowl. You had a busy couple weeks from Vegas to Mobile, out to LA. You guys talked to a bunch of prospects out there over at the Draft Network, had a bunch of guys roll through your little studio out there. Give me one guy who stood out most to you, because I know how much you value this one-on-one time that you get with these players.
Yeah, Aiden Hutchinson was hard not to be impressed with, who we had a chance to talk to at the Panini. Had set up a players lounge, and we had a spot up there and was just kind of shooting the breeze. We talked to Aiden, we talked to Matt Corral, Garrett Wilson from Ohio State. We had a pretty impressive group. We had a couple NFL guys too, but Aiden was the one who was like, his confidence really like commanded your attention when you sat down and you talked to him about rushing the passer and his development as a player and what Coach McDonald was able to do for him in his 1 year at Michigan for Aiden's final season after he was a fringe first-round guy and got hurt and then chose to come back, and being a second-generation Michigan Wolverine the way that he was. And he just oozes kind of this confidence that as a player who I think has a high floor, but also a high ceiling. I think a lot of people, it's so natural to compare him and Kayvon Thibodeau as prospects, as the two guys that have been perceived to be at the top of the class. But Aiden's like no slouch as an athlete, right? This is a Bruce Feldman's Freaks List member from this past year. And he's been reported as a guy who's been a challenge to run in the 4.6s and in the upper 30s in the vertical jump. And when you compare that with, two of the best pass rushers in the game are the Bosa brothers, and, they were running high 4.7s and 4.8 and jumping in the low 30s in their vert. Like, from an athleticism standpoint, Aiden's really, really good athlete too. And, just getting to hear him talk about his process and how he builds his pass rush plans and how he makes adjustments to them on the fly was a guy that I felt was really ready to step into the pro game. He's got a high floor play in the run, but just the mental approach to the art of the pass rush was something that I think he's as well prepared as you could be to make this jump and be able to make an impact early on.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your guys' discussion with him. I know he was on the Green Light podcast with Chris Long a few weeks back towards the end of the regular season in college football, and he was really impressive there. Just a guy that really seems to have an understanding of how to be a pro, and that's going to be big for him, obviously, moving forward into the next step of the process.
Let me jump in on that because we got a little bit of an idea of what his training regimen is like and what his diet is like, and he's like the Terminator as far as like. There's no wasted calories in his diet. Everything's really strictly measured out. And it was like, you talk about being a pro, right? And there's guys that make that leap from college to pro, and they don't understand the value of hydration or a certain amount of sleep at night, or, eating bad food and that impact on your body's ability to recover and be ready for the rigors of a 17+ game schedule. And like, you just hear that he's already has a professional mentality in that body maintenance portion of his game too. And it's like, there's not a lot of holes to poke here for Aiden.
Yeah, it's always a fun discussion talking about that aspect of it, because obviously there are a lot of guys that come in and check that box, and not all of those guys work out, right? But I think it gives a little bit of a peek, number one, into just a guy's professionalism, as we talked about. But then number two is like maximizing potential and room for growth and things of that nature. And it's like, all right, well, kind of looking at it from the other side of it. All right, well, this guy is already doing all these things. If he's already maximizing every bit of potential that he's got, how much better is he going to get? That said, what you have right now is a pretty damn good player, right? So it's always fun kind of juxtaposing that end of that discussion, but it's a one that you could probably save for another day for a much longer chat about this part of the process. But that said, one final question for you. I mentioned you guys obviously made the trip down to Mobile for the Senior Bowl, and we've covered so many of those players. But I do want to ask you if there was one guy down there who just, maybe you covered him throughout the course of his career. Maybe you took one glance at him before you went down and that was your only exposure, but a guy who exceeded the expectations you had going into the week.
Yeah, I would be remiss not to mention Perion Winfrey's name with how good he was in a role that was not playing on the nose, which he did at Oklahoma. But if I were to give one name that fit the second half of that criteria, who I had minimal exposures to coming into the week, it was Troy Anderson, the Montana State linebacker, for what his movement skills are for his size and understanding the utilization that he's had through his college career to this point, as far as playing quarterback, running back, linebacker, and seeing kind of just the trigger ability in some of the coverage reps when they're down in the red zone and they're doing the 7-on-7s or even in 1-on-1 situations. Holy cow. Like, he was really impressive. You hear small school, played on both sides of the ball. It's like, okay, like, must be a great athlete, but he really looked the part in my eyes as somebody who, at a bare minimum, I think can give you rotational reps and be a staple on special teams early on while he develops as a defensive player at the NFL level. So Anderson was the guy I was most excited about coming out of the week to say, okay, I can't wait to do a deep dive into his tape and figure out just where the discrepancy was and try and fill in the blanks and try and project that forward.
I think it helps when you talk about draft slot and where a guy goes, like at linebacker especially. The height, weight, speed element of things really kind of comes into play, and you wouldn't think that necessarily. And you could argue whether or not that's that should be the case. But the height, weight, speed element of that position really comes into play. And for a guy that is that big to be able to move the way that he does, and again, kind of speaking about the Aiden Hutchinson reference, where else can this guy go? How much better can this guy get? I think it's a really, really interesting discussion. And Anderson, definitely one of those guys when you talk about the upside. But Kyle, thanks so much for joining us here once again on the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand. We will talk to you soon. I'm sure we'll see you out in Indy for the combine.
Absolutely, Fran. Thanks for having me on. Always good to catch up.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
Always great to catch up with Kyle Krabs over at the Draft Network. Those guys do a great job covering this entire process. As always, make sure you head on over to our Apple Podcast page. Leave us a rating, leave us a review, leave us a comment. If you've got a question, a review of the podcast, if you've got a mock draft you want us to break down, we will always do it on an upcoming episode, and we're going to do exactly that here in this segment. First off, I want to cover a comment here from Bear Cub fan who left a 5-star review just saying how much they loved the daily coverage from the Senior Bowl and for our draft coverage all year long. So Bear Cub fan, appreciate that. Thanks so much for listening to the show, and thanks so much for your feedback. Again, these reviews help us because it helps boost the show up the rankings for other people that are looking for NFL draft podcast. Then we'll hit on a Eagles only mock draft. This one comes from Phantom FC. Here's the comment. Love the podcast. Great info and breakdown of all the draft eligible prospects. The interviews to get an inside look at the draft process for us listeners bring a whole new perspective. I did a mock draft on the Draft Network that I would love to review if possible. So here is the draft from Phantom FC. At 15, 16, and 19, 3 players we've talked about a lot here on this podcast. Ahmad Gardner, the corner from Cincinnati. Everybody likes to call him Sauce. I think the big thing with Gardner, big, long, physical corner, loves to get up and jam at the line of scrimmage. He's been a 2.5-year starter for one of the best defenses in college football. And if you love physicality at the position, you're going to get that with Gardner. And he's starting to get more buzz as potentially the number 1 corner in this class. You're seeing more and more of these national analysts, the Daniel Jeremiahs, the Todd McShays, Bucky Brooks, I know as well, having Gardner go first off the board at the corner position, ranked number 1 at the corner position in power rankings. So getting him at number 15, I think a lot of people would be excited about that. At 16, Trayvon Walker, the defensive lineman from Georgia. This is just a rock-solid player across the board. He's a great run defender on the edge. He'll drop into coverage a little bit at times, but also can kick inside and rush the passer, be disruptive. I think he's still got a little bit of ways to go there from a pass rush standpoint, but you love his motor. You love his toughness. He defends the run at a high level. I love the versatility. A lot to like there with with Trayvon Walker. And then Tyler Linderbaum at 19, as I mentioned, we've talked a lot about him, an undersized offensive lineman, but he's played at center, which you can get away with that lack of size a little bit. He's athletic, he's strong, he's got some power to him. Linderbaum is a really intriguing player, 3-year starter for Iowa, who consistently churns out NFL offensive linemen. In round 2, we're going to go back to the University of Georgia, Jamari Salyer, the left tackle there for the last couple of years. But Salyer is not just a left tackle. He's played up and down the line of scrimmage along the offensive line. He's played all 5 offensive line positions in his career, and so that versatility is going to serve him well. A lot of people view him more as an interior player moving to the league, especially at guard. I think he had one of the better weeks at the Senior Bowl, but Salyer, an underrated player, and again, that versatility is going to be big for him. At linebacker, number 83 overall in the 3rd round, Quay Walker from Georgia. Didn't get a chance to see him at the Senior Bowl. He bowed out late due to injury, but this is a height, weight, speed guy. We talked about that in the last segment with Kyle. He has got all the physical traits you're looking for. Just a 1-year starter, and there are times where he's a little bit slow to be able to see the action, but you talk about a guy that can rush the passer. He can drop in coverage. He was a tight end eraser at times in the SEC, and also play through contact in the run game, finish as a tackler. He's got great range. He's going to test really, really well across the board at the combine, based off what I've seen from him on film. So Quay Walker, really, really impressive, and also a guy that's got the ability, in theory, to play all 3 linebacker positions. Jesse Luketa, to start things off on day 3. He is a linebacker from Penn State. He's played kind of like a Sam linebacker, but also a defensive end, so that's kind of the role there. Probably more of a strong side backer in the NFL, and obviously the Eagles have used that position under Jonathan Gannon in this new defense. I think when you look at Jesse Luketa, this is a guy that really came on late in his career. His senior year was his best to date, and I think that you're trying to project that moving forward. Again, kind of has that hybrid skill set. Someone interesting to watch it. I think he's like 6'3", 250 pounds. So this is a big kid who can get after the quarterback and also play in space as well. Let's get to the next player, Haskell Garrett, the defensive tackle from Ohio State. I think that the week was a solid week in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, but on film, this is a 5-year player for Ohio State. He is disruptive. He can get off the ball. He's got a quick first step. One of the better pure 3 techniques in this class. Probably more disruptive than productive, but that's okay inside a defensive tackle. You like a guy that can get in, quickly penetrate, and affect the play, whether it's against the run or against the pass. Double teams can get the better of him at times, but Haskell Garrett, one of my favorite players at the defensive tackle position in this class, and I love the way that he plays. He's a sideline-to-sideline player, and you just love his violence on contact. He's got really, really heavy hands at the point of attack. A couple receivers here in the middle of day 3. Khalil Shakir from Boise State, Justin Ross from Clemson. I think when you look at Shakir, he had one of the better weeks at the wide receiver position at the Senior Bowl. He's got the ability to snap off routes. He can affect all 3 levels of the field. I thought he had a solid week. And then Justin Ross has really, really high upside. We go back to early in his career. It looked like he was a potential first-round talent, catching passes from Trevor Lawrence. He's a big kid, tall, long oak tree that can get down the field. He was making plays with T. Higgins on the perimeter, Higgins on the opposite side. I think when you look at Ross, the big thing is that he's coming off that back neck surgery that he had in the 2020 calendar year. He had it just before COVID-19 hit, or just after COVID-19 hit. So missed all of 2020, came back, had a solid season. Obviously, that offense was a little bit up and down. They're breaking in a new quarterback at Clemson, so the production wasn't always there for Justin Ross this year, but a really intriguing talent that a team could get great value with on day 3. A couple players to round this out from the Senior Bowl: J.T. Woods, athletic post safety from Baylor, and then Daniel Bellinger, who actually won the tight end award of the week down in Mobile. More of your in-line player at tight end, long, lanky. He can get down the field as a long strider, but a combo player we talked about earlier at the position. And J.T. Woods, like I mentioned, one of those rangy free safety types, offers some slot versatility as well. So Phantom FC, great mock draft. Thanks so much for reaching out. Thanks so much for leaving us that 5-star review over on our Apple Podcast page. That'll do it for today's edition of the Journey to the Draft podcast. We'll be back later this week. We've got big plans for later this week here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. And next week, we start our Combine preview. Do not go anywhere. Make sure you are subscribed right here to the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand.